Margaret, and thank you for agreeing to talk to the students in organisational practice. It's always really helpful for the students to hear about professional social workers' experience on the topics that we're talking about. And you've agreed to talk about what you think is important for social workers to be mindful of working within mainstream organisations in Australia.
Yeah, something that interests me, Tracy, is the relationship of a local branch with the the state branch. So I work in a national organisation, but it's also a state-based organisation. It's part of a national brand, and it's complicated because a lot of decisions get made in Brisbane.
Yep.
And we're Cairns-based and we work rural and remote. So it's very difficult for people in Brisbane to keep in mind the actual working conditions of rural and remote people and rural and remote workers and the actual context of a rural remote communities. And even though the organisation is angled at that or directed at that, that's what it does. It doesn't. The people who are making some of the decisions in the management struggle with really understanding the context and the realities of the work.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us an example of that?
Well, all right. At the moment there's a tension between workforce flexibility, which is the idea that workers should be able to move and be available to move. So they're trying to keep the organisations fairly lean and mean, and they want to move people around. But what they don't really understand is that continuity of relationship is what creates the service delivery. When you're working cross-culturally, what you really need at the service level, at the delivery level, is strong relationships, because it's in relationships that knowledge gets transferred cross-culturally. It doesn't really get transferred. Knowledge doesn't really transfer bureaucratically, cross-culturally. It doesn't sort of work. And so but the organisation has all these funding requirements to meet particular outcomes in particular time frames. And the people in Brisbane will be more in touch with the funding requirements and what Canberra wants and what Canberra thinks needs to happen and what Canberra's demanding. But it's very hard for them to keep in mind the actual service delivery context. So that in the service delivery, so that they will make decisions without really knowing what the effects of those decisions are. And for me, I call that a type of colonial practice, and it's very common in Queensland. It's happened all through the Queensland's whole settled history, the history of under the state and the federation, and basically the further you get away from Brisbane, the less Brisbane has understanding or control of the actual what's going on. And in a way they don't care too much, so they can send... What becomes important is what they see and how they see it, and they're making decisions for that. And it's very hard to feed up to that because they don't really give mechanisms for trains of... I mean, there are managerial trains of communication, but, it's... the information doesn't flow well in those managerial trains of communication.
So I'm thinking each social worker would respond to that challenge or that tension differently. And I'm not going to ask you to provide your strategies around it because they can be quite personal. But what's the process that did you go through to develop your strategies to be able to respond effectively to that tension and still feel like you were practicing in the way that you wanted to practice?
The other side of remote work is that it can be quite autonomous because you know, they can't send you out with a line manager and managerial. So when you get out to do the practice, it can be quite, once you're doing it, and if you're left to do it in the way that, you know, if you can get your own support, you can get your own, you know, personal discipline that keeps you feeling confident about your work, and you can get reflective mechanisms in place, and you have collegial support and supervision support and educational support. If you can get those things, when you're actually doing the work, it can be quite autonomous, which is very rewarding. The problem is with autonomous work is that as soon as there's a problem, you're on your own. And if you're working remotely, that can be very complex because you can feel very anxious, and you know, as soon as there's a problem, anxiety levels tend to rise very quickly because you are on your own. You're away from home. You're out of your community. You might be out of your depth. Whatever, you've got some sort of problem. So, to the extent that you can get enough support for yourself through those sort of professional mechanisms and some personal mechanisms, then I think that's a way that you can maintain your autonomy and keep your work going. But if you don't have that, it's very hard. And as soon as you run into conflicts or difficulties, you can find yourself in very complex situations that are almost untangleable, unable to be tangled. Untangled.
Yeah.
And because you're separate from the management system, and the management system don't really understand your context, you can be left alone. And this is not good for service delivery in the long term, because then you do really lose continuity because people leave.
What would be, your suggestion to graduates around how to negotiate working within an organisation, like as a final thought of this?
Well, I think that Tony Kelly had a framework of 10 types of support, and to try and get those 10 types of support, organisational and personal, 5 types of organisational support, 5 times. So make sure you organise those for yourself. And then always be reflecting within those systems of education and support on how you're going to tackle those sorts of colonial structures. You know, how you're going to lessen their impact, feed information into them, always act as a team, never do things individually. Don't try and be the lone social worker who's going to make a difference, because I've seen many lone social workers take on those sorts of systems, and the system always wins. That you have to do it as a team with support, and do it, collectively. Don't ever try and do things on your own.
Thanks, Margaret.